I said, welcome everybody. Pat and I are going to talk to you a little bit about supporting Alaskans in times of stress and anxiety. So we'll do a little bit of a gathering circle in the chat. If you could put your name, your role, and what community you are in, that would be awesome. And I know there's only a few of us, so that should work out just fine. And then the next slide, if we can, let's share our videos and we'll go around and choose one of these to share with everybody as a kind of a getting to know each other. So we've got MJ from Juneau, Heather from Wasilla, Aaron from Wasilla, and Julie from Juneau, and Pat and I are from Juneau. So let's get started. Pat, you want to start them off and share one of them?
Sure. The worst job that I've ever had, should we put the caveat that it can't be this one, the current one?
Yes.
It's
yes,
not.
It can't be the current one.
Just so you know, it's not. I once did cockroach mitigation in a residence hotel. That was a bad job. Not a lot of fun. Yeah, thanks. Especially when they started falling on my head.
Who wants to go next?
Hi, this is MJ, and I am going to be so typecast, but the unlimited supply of one thing for the rest of my life? All together now? Book.
Oh, nice.
Awesome. How about Aaron or Heather? Aaron's got in the chat box. Worked at a very busy Walmart in Spokane, Washington when I was in college. Truly awful. Awesome. How about you, Heather or Julie?
Sorry, I'm multitasking, still trying to solve all these people's problems. I think this moment, this job right now at this time, it's the worst.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Fair enough. Heather, can't really speak in a shared, gotcha. Was working at a B&B for summer that ended up being bed bug infestation. Oh, that sounds bad too. I think we're into the bugs today.
Yeah.
I might as well just stick with the worst job you've ever had. Mine was working on my sister's dairy farm as a just between high school and college. I would say that was probably my worst one. All right, we're going to get started. Looks like we have lots of people jumping in with us today. Welcome to everybody who's just joining. If you could put your name and what community you're in the chat box, that would be great. Many of us through the pandemic have experienced a collective trauma as part of different communities. From the work from Laura Van Dermot Lipsky, I always have a hard time, on trauma stewardship, we have experienced or are experiencing different responses to the pandemic or stressors that have occurred due to feeling overwhelmed and feeling trauma. If we can take time to reflect, we can likely recognize a few ways from this circle of how we have managed feelings of overwhelm and trauma in the past 2 years. For examples, loneliness, isolation, strained relationships, or lack of awe, or perhaps a sense of persecution. Many of us have learned and continue to learn about how we have managed or are managing our emotional responses to stressors. And this has brought not only into our own mental health needs to the forefront, but continuing to recognize the importance of how we can instill social and emotional learning skills into the students or families that we see in our everyday lives. And there's lots of different things to kind of look at on this slide. And hopefully you can take something away from this slide and apply it in your daily function.
So I'm going to talk a little bit to start with about stress and the brain, and frankly, we should add the body, right? Because stress resides in both, and talk a little bit about that in terms of how it impacts our brains and bodies, and then of course our behaviors as well. And I know that you all see this in your work with children and youth and families, and probably in your own personal lives too. We all deal with stress all the time. So I think it's important to go back to the beginning. So Sharon, if you go to the next slide. When we think about human development, it jumped ahead there. We really think about it being foundational, right? Skills beget skills. We build up in order to, you can't leap ahead, right? You've got to get those foundational things in place. And teachers and librarians know how to kind of scaffold kids, right? You know how to move them along as they develop their brains and bodies through your work. So the next slide really looks at how our brains, what our brains are like initially when we're born. And it turns out that only about 40% of our brains are wired up. And that's, managing some of our physical operations, blood pressure, et cetera. And then through experience, that's how we continue to wire our brain. And it's crazy amount of neurons getting wired up for infants and young children, and all the way up until, abstract thought is kind of, we think, fully developed around age 25. But the good news is we can rewire our brains all the time. And when you think about this is a smart way to build a human, because if we all progress the same way, we wouldn't be very adaptable to the environment in which we're born. So this is kind of, I think, fundamental to think about stress and trauma as we move forward. Okay, Sharon. So again, I mentioned that rapid brain growth. This is kind of a graphic representing a baby's synapses on the left, and then at 7, it's just exploded. And it turns out that maintaining what we have at 7 years old is too much, right? We can't, it takes too much energy. That's why children sleep a lot. And so what we do is we prune. And the pruning that takes place, and there's a couple times of pruning, including around 2 or 3. But that pruning is based on what we've used. So again, related to the world in which we've been born. If it's a world where we are comforted and get our needs met, that's what we expect, and our brains are wired that way. Conversely, if it's a dangerous world, we are wired in a way to protect ourselves and keep us safe. This is all good stuff, both sides of that. It can be problematic one way or the other, depending on what situation we're in later, but it's really important that we understand how that works. And then I think the next thing to say, and MJ and I were talking a little bit, we were both at an early childhood conference last weekend, and one of the messages of that conference is that coping with stress and self-regulating our emotions and strong feelings is probably one of the most important skills that we develop. I know you all focus on reading and that whole world of knowledge, which is wonderful and incredibly important, and it springs from being able to sit still and to take those things in. And all of that is really about coping with stress in our environment. And the research is really clear that this is what leads to success in relationships and in work, in families, that these skills are important of coping with that. So when we think about stress, we can think about it, in the way that it feels in our body. So what happens when we are in Wasilla and we are out on a trail and we run into a moose, or here in Juneau we see a bear, we get a physical response, especially if they're really close. We might be a little more blasé because we're Alaskans, but if they're really close, we're going to get a physical response, right? Heart rate up, breathing up. We might be sweaty, a little clammy, and that's our stress response system. Absolutely essential to keep us alive, right? Such a very, very good thing to have. We often talk about 3 types of stress. The first one is positive stress. I love this photo. I was in Dillingham right after President Obama was out there dancing with the children. And there were pictures up all over the school. I was there about a month after he was there. And I remember hearing a story on Alaska Public Radio about this, where they interviewed one of these children. And they said it was kind of weird and nervous, but you could hear the pride in their voice. They had been up there dancing, and you can imagine there's about 300 cameras from all the national media pointing at them in their gym, and they're dancing with the president. And it was just, that little edge of stress helps us perform. It can be a really great boost for us, and it helps us scaffold or leapfrog into new skills and new knowledge. You all know that because that's what you do. All right, the next one is tolerable stress. We're all going to have some difficulties in our lives. Loss of a grandparent for a child may come along, or parent, all sorts of different levels of stress. But if a child is wrapped in a family, in a community that responds to them, then this is something that they're going to cope with and may most likely grow from. So I think it's really important that that we recognize that this is coming, and it's really about the supports wrapped around the child. The next one is toxic stress. And we know from, and we'll talk a little bit more just briefly about this, from our adverse childhood experiences study here in Alaska that has been done all over the world now, hundreds and hundreds of studies that are really pretty similar, that adversity in childhood is common. And when that adversity is overwhelming to our stress response system, that's toxic stress. And often that happens when the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones that are harming us. And you think about a child or even a teen, there are very limited options when you are relying on a caregiver to get away. And so your brain and your body adjust to that and may become hypervigilant. There's fight or flight. There might be freeze. Kids might shut down, which is harder to see in your libraries or in our schools or in our communities, where kids just kind of shut down to protect themselves. It's very adaptive, but sometimes it doesn't generalize into other areas, right? And I'll show another slide here that I think will illustrate that, I think, in a way that's really great. This comes from Sharon and my colleague, Josh Arvidsson, who founded the Alaska Child Trauma Center in Anchorage, which, by the way, is just a world-class trauma center. They are an amazing group of professionals. That first slide at the top, it's kind of how we go through life. We're going down the road, we're making our observations, we're making small decisions here and there, we're seeing what happens, and we just keep cooking along. If we run into that bear or that moose, or somebody swerves in front of us on the highway, that slide on the bottom left, we've got a stress response system, right? We've got an exit ramp from what we need to get away from. And we go into fight, flight, or freeze, depending on the situation. Not a lot of deep thought has to go into that because we need to react. Our colleague Josh talks about throwing a basketball. If I threw a basketball at your head, you wouldn't think, oh, from previous experience, this round spherical object is going to hurt when it hits my, no. You duck, you catch it, you knock it away, right? That's your stress response system responding. And then once the problem goes away, you're back onto that road above. The problem is for those of us in childhood or even later who've experienced toxic levels of stress, which can be, chronic or sometimes of just one really big event. that off-ramp becomes the default. And so what you might see in, when you're working with a group of kids is that inability to sit, or they get bumped accidentally, and that's a big deal. And that's because their stress response system is attuned, rightfully so, given their experience, to danger. But objectively, that little bump isn't a danger, but they haven't been able to make that adjustment. And so some of the things that we can do, we're going to talk about towards the end about how to impact that. But it really is for kids, it's really important. The way they learn to regulate is through interactions with others, and adults are essential to that. It's called co-regulation, and it's how we learn to regulate our own strong feelings and emotions. So next one. This is a quote. We're not sure exactly where it came from, but if you think about that stress response system in your brain and your body, what happens when you're under stress, that's a survival instinct, and it's really hard to learn when you're in that survival instinct. So that's what's going on a lot of times when we get stressed. And Sharon's going to show you this amazing video of a school counselor that has a way to explain this to kids that's really, really great. Coming up. But before we get there, we're not going to show these videos, but if you get the slide deck, there's a link down below. This slide and the next one are two videos from this group called Anxiety Canada that explain, one for youth and one for younger kids, how this anxiety works. And they're short, I think 3 minutes at the most, and they're animated, they're brilliant. And I actually like to show the younger one, the one for the younger kids to adults, because I think it's really fun. Anyway, great resources for you to check out if you want. A lot of this work came from adverse childhood experiences studies. That study's been out. The original study came out about 25 years ago now, maybe even longer now. Anyway, and it really asked adults about experiences prior to their 18th birthday. And a couple big things came out of it. One was it's so common. There was a list of 10 adversities, and 2/3 had at least one. And that's been replicated over and over. We have data here in Alaska on adults, and we have some on kids as well. Just a really common thing. A data point that we won't show you, but I will say we're following a cohort of kids who were born here in the state who are now 12, and about 43% of them have had a report of harm to the Office of Children's Services. So think of that, 4 out of 10 kids that are 12 years old that are in your library, if they were born here, they're likely to have had a report of harm to OCS. So really a common thing. So this was the list of original ACEs that was surveyed. Again, I said our adults here in Alaska, about 2/3 said they had at least one. About 16% had at least 4. And this is really, it's kind of a crude measure. You can have a high count of these experiences and not have it impact you, but at a population level, it impacts you a lot. Individuals may vary because guess what? There's protective factors, which is again where we're going to end on this. But this is a list. If you haven't seen an ACE study, you can certainly Google it and check it out. And you can even put in Alaska, and there's a lot of information about Alaska. As we've evolved around that from that original study back in the mid to late 90s, we've realized that it's really also about community. And so those roots there under the tree really matter as well, especially when we think about outcomes. If we can, again, wrap at least a community around children and families to support them, that can go a long way to preventing and mitigating these ACEs and their subsequent outcomes, which are 20 or more health and behavioral health and social economic education outcomes that again, in a population tend to be poor. The next one. So this is just some of our kids. Our kids about from birth to age 5, about 40% have from a list of ACEs have experienced it, and then up to that 12 to 17, about 61%, which kind of jives with what we saw in adults as well. Very common, and we just really think that we need to accommodate that and accept that that's the reality. I was talking to one of our school counselors a few years ago, and I said, you know, the early childhood people are just so smart. And he was a counselor in an elementary school, and he said that's because they expect kids to melt down. And once they turn 5, for some reason, we think they're not going to do that anymore. And same with adults, right? Periodically we melt down, and it's just part of life. And I think the more that we embrace that and accept that, the better we are able to respond. Sharon.
There we go. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about, is it stress or is it anxiety? And a lot of us, even if we've never experienced stress or anxiety before, in the last couple of years have had many bouts with it. And I'm sure some of us, or most of us, have probably had the feeling of the lady that's got her hand on her head on the left and is just had enough. And a lot of our educators these days are that. And somehow in our lives, we need to get to the picture on the right, where we can find some calm in our brain and some calm in our minds as we go. Life can be stressful. You may feel stressed about performance at school or traumatic events such as a pandemic or a natural disaster or an act of violence or of a life change. Everyone feels stress from time to time. If that anxiety doesn't go away and begins to interfere with your life, it could affect your health. You could experience problems with sleeping or your immune, digestive, cardiovascular, and reproductive systems. You may also be at higher risk for developing a mental illness such as an anxiety disorder or depression. It's important to manage your stress. Everyone experiences stress, and sometimes that stress can feel overwhelming. You may be at risk for an anxiety disorder, and it feels like you can't manage the stress. And if the symptoms of your life stress interfere with your everyday life, cause you to avoid doing things, and seems to always be present. And so it's something to think about for ourselves as everything is starting to open up. I know in Juneau, the libraries are going to be opening up for the little kiddos to come back in. And some of those kiddos are going to be so excited to be back in the library with you and doing things. And some of them are going to be a little hesitant because of, they may have never been into the library for story time before. And now they're coming in and they're not exactly sure what to expect because they haven't been exposed to lots of people or groups of people for the last couple of years. And so you just got to think about ways that you can take care of yourself. And then by taking care of yourself, you can take care of the students and the kids and the families that come into your libraries. Learning what causes or triggers your stress and what coping techniques work for you can help you reduce your anxiety. It can also improve your daily life. It may take trial and error to discover what works best for you, but here are some activities you can try when you start to feel overwhelmed. How about in the chat box, we put some of your coping techniques that you've used the last couple of years to help with your stress and anxiety. Anybody have some they can share in the chat box, or you can unmute unmute yourself also. Lots of walks and deep breathing, absolutely. Anything else that people are using? I've done hiking with the dog. My husband and I did hike for a pint here in Juneau, went and got 2 pints of ice cream last weekend. Walking the dog, walking the dog. Breathing. I discovered I hold my breath and breathe shallow, sometimes finding hobbies. Absolutely. Sometimes just stepping outside, right? And here in Juneau, most of our snow is melting, and I like to garden. So I am really itching to get out and start digging in some dirt and planting some plants and those types of things. We've got journaling, connecting with friends from Heather. Thank you, Heather. And so next, I'm going to show a video that was created by Jana Gusti. She is the elementary counselor at Valdez City School District. And the name of this is Flip Our Lid, Stop, Name Your Feeling, and Calm Down. So let's keep our fingers crossed that this all works, because you know technology, just like some of us trying to get in here today. Ooh,
For the next few weeks.
I bet that I didn't share my sound. There we go. So let's start that over.
For the next few weeks, we're going to focus on calming down strong emotions. Now, we're going to talk about comfortable and uncomfortable emotions. Did you know there are way more feelings than just being mad, sad, happy, glad? It's really important to know all the different types of emotions we can go through. Sometimes our behavior is what people see when we're dealing with a strong emotion, but there's a lot more going on under the surface, and we need to be able to explain how we're feeling if we need help. Today, we're going to talk about how to stop, name your feeling, and calm down. Hi everyone. Today, I'm going to explain to you how the brain works when you have a really strong emotion and you want to control your uncomfortable or comfortable feeling. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to raise your hand up like this. We're going to talk about our hand like it's our brain. So what you're going to do first is I want you to understand that when your brain is working efficiently, the upper part of your brain and the bottom part of the brain are talking to each other. So go ahead and tuck that thumb in, put these fingers down. So, hi brain, that's my brain. If you're doing this, that's your brain. So what's happening right now is this top part here is called your prefrontal cortex. It's the thinking part of your brain. The part underneath here, that's called your amygdala. That's the feeling parts of your brain. When you're calm and when you're thinking logically, your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala are talking together. So that means your upstairs brain is connecting to your downstairs brain, and they're working in harmony. Now, sometimes we experience a really strong emotion, and that's when our feeling part of our brain, our amygdala, loses control. Did you notice what happened? I flipped my lid. Have you heard of that saying before? Don't flip your lid. This is what it's talking about. My prefrontal cortex, is no longer talking to my feelings part of the brain. That's why when we have this emotion, it's so important to calm our brain down. So what we need to do is we need to say out loud how we are feeling. I feel frustrated. I feel angry. It could be a comfortable feeling too. I feel too excited. I'm too hyper. And then you stop, you name your feeling, and you do a calm down technique so your prefrontal cortex can again communicate with your amygdala. One of the ways I like to calm down is I exercise. Some people count, some people take deep breaths, some people draw, some people ask for a drink of water. There's a lot of ways to calm down if you have a very strong emotion. So I want you to think, how can you calm down when you're feeling your lid has been flipped? I'd love to know. If you see me around school this week, please tell me. Maybe talk amongst yourselves right now. How do you calm down when you have a really strong emotion? But what I really want you to get stuck in your head is stop, name your feeling, calm down. And here is my diagram of the brain right here. That amygdala is just this tiny, tiny little part in your brain. So it really controls a lot of what you do and what you say. So if you don't want to flip your lid and do something without thinking, stop, name your feeling, calm down. Remember, when you're naming your feeling, use I statements. I feel shy. I feel sorry. I feel excited. I feel sick. I feel tired. And ask a grown-up for help if your strong emotion is too strong, even if you're trying your best to calm down. Remember to stop, name your feeling, calm down.
I could listen to Jana every day. She just calms me down. She's like my Zen moment. So let's take something from Jana and think about it. What do you do when your lid is flipped to calm yourself back down? So take a minute and think about that, and then let's share it in the chat. What do you do to calm yourself down after you flipped your lid? Because we've all done it.
Fun fact, January 24th, today is National Compliment Day. What can you
I'm trying to get to the next slide.
say?
Well, you all are thinking about that. This is a great book for little ones. I've done this with 5-year-olds. The way I feel, I don't know if I'm on screen, I can't see me. But anyway, I've got the book here. Just a short read, lots of different, or not lots, a few different feelings in here where you could talk about whether or not the lid is flipped. Just a great thing. The other thing I wanted to say is that whole naming your emotions and managing your emotions. We actually ask high school students about that here in Alaska. And guess what? If they really feel like they can name and manage their emotions, that really is correlated with a lot of healthy behaviors, from less substance use and mental illness and suicidality, and just a lot of really healthy things if they can have these skills. So all age kids. And by the way, I would love it if everyone in the state knew about flipping their lid. I think it would be great if we had common language about it so that we could all understand what we were talking about.
And we know some of the elementary schools here in Juneau have had a lot of all of the kids in the school know about the brain and flipping their lid. And if you have a regular group of kids that come in, having some of these conversations with them so that you all have a common language to help them when they're feeling stressed and a little bit out of control. In a lot of our schools and some of our libraries these days, we're seeing calm down corners. Being able to calm yourself when emotions are high or self-regulate is a learned skill. Similar to how a child is taught to tie their shoe or to read a book, they have fine motor skills for tying their shoe. But once the brain, I can't talk today, sorry. Once the child's brain is developmentally ready to self-regulate, they can learn different strategies and ways that work well for them. Think about what worked well for you the last time you felt angry, unheard, or anxious, or any other negative feeling. Did you go outside to get fresh air? Did you practice yoga or meditation? Did you take 10 deep breaths? Did you go to your favorite room in your home or your school and read? We all have different coping mechanisms we've learned to use and regulate our emotions. And another one that Pat and I have talked about in different presentations is the 5 senses. Name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can taste. And what's the last one, Pat? 1 thing you can, it's using the 5 senses. Somebody help me out here. See, hear, feel. Feel is the other one.
Yeah.
So doing that type of an activity when kids are overwhelmed is really helpful for them.
And if you're setting up a calming corner in your library, less is more. Less stimulation is more. I know a lot of times at least when I was going through elementary ed training, it was about classrooms that were like vibrant and busy and, colors everywhere. And a calming corner should be minimalist.
We're just going to take a couple minutes to talk about some of the Department of Ed's resources that are out there for you. We have the Alaska Education Challenge that started with the Walker administration and has continued with the current administration. And one of the goals of that is to improve the safety and well-being of students through school partnerships with families, communities, and tribes. And the 3 recommendations that came out of that were the transforming school climate, building trauma-engaged schools, and increasing access to student health through counselors, nurses, and school social workers. And with that, we released in 2019, Transforming Schools, a Framework for Trauma-Engaged Practice in Alaska. The department has a couple thousand copies of this. We have currently sent out over 10,000 copies of this book across the state. And if you would like copies of our framework to have in your library, all you'll have to do is send me an email or Pat, and we can get copies out to you, as many copies as you would like, to be able to share with your staff and with your community. Along with that, we have an online website that talks about all of our trauma work that we've been doing with public health and the Association of Alaska School Boards. We've also released an online toolkit that has different strategies for educators, leadership, staff, families, parents, depending on which chapter that you're in. All the little bubbles on this slide will tell you the different chapters in our framework and the sections of our online toolkit. And again, if you want a copy of that, just send me or Pat an email. Pat put our emails in the box. And if you want a copy of this presentation, or if you would like Pat or I or both of us to do a presentation to your library or your community, that we are more than willing to do that. Is there anything you want to add about the framework, Pat?
No, I think we'll jump into some of the e-learning courses that you can take if you're interested.
So we also have our online professional development, and these courses are available free to all Alaskans. We have over 70 courses in our catalog. We have over 30,000 users that use these courses over the years, and they're written for educators, but anybody can take them and anybody can apply what we have in them. We have self-care. We have one that's just on overcoming anxiety and stress, overcoming ACEs, which is some of what Pat was talking about. And then some of the stuff that you could potentially use in your libraries when you're having groups of students, and there are our micro courses, which are on the right: classroom practices, mind-body connection. In those courses, there'll be a PDF that has different things that you can do with youth and adolescents and children as they come into your libraries, breathing, all different kinds of things like that. So thank you for sharing your time with us today, and I'll open it up to see if anybody has any questions.
Hi, this is MJ. And in this opening up again, hi. So I'm the youth services librarian at the public. So I was there Tuesday for the opening up. And I put a lot of controls in. We're in a room with outdoor openings, so there was an increased level of air exchange. We have bubbles, which are 6-foot round hula hoops that are set on the floor to kind of divide each unit's space with some distance, a little bit of distance between. I have whiteboards in each so people can practice writing, but also if we can't hear what they have to say, they can put their question or some way to indicate through that. And we have enough room in the meeting room for 7 units to come in. There's a lot of pressure to make it big, fast. And as an early childhood educator, as well as a librarian and a mother and mother, I seek the mental health advice is big. I believe big fast is bad for me, bad for everybody coming in. We have to start slow and small and let it be safe to creep forward.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
May I give your names to my director?
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And MJ, since I'm at public health, I mean, one of the things that we could also do is we could have one of our nurses perhaps talk to you about all this, which
Yeah.
is about the COVID piece.
Right. And I have done all that. All my mitigations are in alignment with Ally. So, yeah.
It's just so hard. Everybody's moving at such different pace. You know, I'm like you, MJ. I got to go to a Northwest PBIS conference next month where there's going to be, you know, a lot of people. And I'm just like, and I don't have any choice. I've got to go. So, you know.
Right. And that mental health piece of honoring the individual that shows and not the aggregate that we're making the rules for.
Yeah.
Being respectful and engaging who shows up.
Yes. Yes.
The other thing I think is there's a big push to catch up. We're thinking about the kids have to catch up, and it's not a good way to think about things.
Yeah.
It's so disrespectful. The kids have lived. I mean, kids know what they live. Honor the life they've had.
So we have to
Age.
keep that in mind. And as you do. So
Yeah. We're not humans. The thing about us is we survive.
Exactly.
Then we figure out how to thrive with what's left. But all those skills of how to live together in community, they're the same every time we're rebuilding.
Yes. Yes.
Take care of each other. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to me. And thank you. The other thing to anybody who's left here is I did sit in with some of your trainings on the trauma engaged, not just in